are two passages this morning that I would like us to look at. But before we look at them, I want to give you a reason why I have chosen them for us to study today. You see, what Rod was explaining, sort of in this history of, what he has known of what we have been doing, it never gets old for me. We're continually moving into new places, new villages inviting us to go, and each time I'm re-seeing over again what I saw in the very beginning. The truth is that when I was in Congo with Susan, we could go to any village we wanted to go. And the reason was that my grandparents had gone there in 1928. They had spent their whole lives there. And the fact is I was the old man's grandson. And what that meant is that any village where I went to, I was welcomed in because of him. Suddenly, because of that war, I was in a country where no one knew the old man. And how do you get into a village? You see, the idea that we're going to take the gospel to places is wonderful. But the fact is that you have to get up from where you are and you have to go there. And when you go there, people have to receive you in. And you have to stay the night. You can't just show up. And what I learned was that the places that my grandparents hadn't been, I couldn't just walk in. Why would they receive this strange person who didn't look like them, who showed up from far away? Why would they take me in? But I discovered something that we all know. Even here at the church, when we showed up this morning, all these good kids would come up and greet us. And the fact is for parents the world over, if you love our kids, we love you back. If you care about our kids, we know that there's something good about you. If you don't love our kids, if you don't care about our kids, we know what kind of people you are also. You see, what I discovered in Tanzania when I showed up, and there are no schools, that there is an open door to go to any village and tell people, I care about your kids. I think they should get to go to school just like kids in the whole world. And I noticed if your kids don't go to school, they're stuck in a cycle of poverty where they'll never be able to get out. And just like you're poor, your kids are going to be poor, your grandkids are going to be poor. But if we build a school and all your kids will get to go to school, that says to people we care about them. That says they'll be willing to have us come and be with them. That's been the story. To have 91 schools today is far beyond anything that we ever dreamt possible. Because we're not going into any place and building schools for people. We're going into a village because people have invited us, and we're telling them that we love their kids, and that if they love their kids, then let's work together and let's make bricks, and let's haul stones, and let's carry sand, and let's carry water, and let's get buildings up. And the only thing that will be different about our schools from any other schools is that the schools are for absolutely everyone. You see, now for us in America, we live in a place where everybody gets to go to school. Everybody. Whether it's a good school or a bad school, everybody gets to go. But in Africa, it isn't like that. In the villages where we showed up in Tanzania, what happens in those villages is that everybody gets to go to the first grade. In fact, everybody gets to go all the way to the 7th grade. That's everyone's right. But then they take a test. And the government chooses the best and the brightest, the kids with the straight A's. They're the kids who get to go far away to go to the 8th grade. And everybody else doesn't get to go to school. That's the world that they live in. And maybe, if your kid isn't chosen, maybe you have some wealthy relative who's far away who maybe will take your kid. But every parent grows up knowing that probably my kids will not get to go to school. Every kid goes to the 1st grade knowing there's almost no chance for me that I'll ever get to go to the 8th grade. But what we say is when we build these schools, they're for absolutely every kid. No kid will be turned away. They're for everyone. You don't have to have a rich relative, and your kid doesn't have to get straight A's. Your kid could be just like everybody else and get some B's and C's, even D's. We'll take them all. That opens the doors. Now, this last year, like I said, it's just keeps on going on. This last year in January, was invited to go to a village in the far eastern part of the country. The village is called Shambangeda. The reason I want you to know about the story is I want you to understand why I've chosen the passage for us to read today. The reason is this. In my heart, I had real doubts about going to this village. And it's a long, long drive to get there, and I was in the car with Godfrey and with Emanuele. And we had a lot of time to talk. If I had some doubts, Emanuele had even greater doubts. And so we talked about it. You see, when village schools got started, in the first village that we went to, where we were invited, those people received the message with great enthusiasm, and in 70 days, they built 6 classrooms. And we opened school with 183 kids. It was so exciting, so exhilarating, and it was the beginning of everything. And it spread quickly. The second village, if those people can do it, we also, and we can do it faster. And the third village, and then the 4th and the 5th. And as I watched this, the places that invited us, they're all to the south, and they're all to the west. You see, overall in that country, the country of Tanzania, about 1/3 of our population is Christian. About 1/3 of our population is Muslim. About 1/3 of our population is what we call animist. They don't believe that there's one true God. They believe in many gods. That's our country. Most of the people who are Muslim are to the east and to the north. The places where we were invited were to the south and to the west. And we went to those villages. But the peoples to the north and to the east, sometimes we would get invitations and we would go, but in the end, they would never make the decision to make all the bricks. It would be too much work. We would go to a village and there would have been, in most of the places, there would be some Christian people who invited us to come. But we meet with the whole community. We talk with everyone. The school has to be for absolutely everyone. And the truth is, it's not even one village that can build a school. It's too much work. So it has to not only be the whole village, but it has to be all the neighboring villages who all get together and say, we're all going to do it. This is not a Saturday afternoon project. This is not like the beautiful, loving work that you guys have done to transform this building where people come and labor. No, this takes not hundreds, this takes thousands of people. And they don't do it one day or one weekend or a couple months. It takes months and months of labor to make bricks, haul those stones. And so it has to be everyone. And it just seemed that in those villages where we went, when someone would invite us and we would go all that ways, but when the whole community would talk about it, they would decide it was too much work. Now that was why when we were in the car and we were going, Emmanuel said, this place where we're going, we've been to these other villages where each time they haven't, and now we're going to go to this village. In this village, we don't even know a single person who's there who is a Christian. Why are people going to make bricks to build a Christian school? We're going to go all the way to this village. He voiced his doubts. I will confess that I voiced my doubts. You see, the person who was the bridge to get to that village was not like in the other 91 places where we have schools where it might have been a pastor of a little church, or where it might have been some Christian businessman, or where it might have been one of our students who came from far away and came there and then he wanted a school in his home village. No, the person who was the bridge to this community was a driver of a car who drove people around, and he had come to the village where we were, and he saw our school, and he asked a lot of questions, and then he went back to his village. And he said, there are these people who work with people to build schools, and everybody gets to go, and I saw it with my own eyes. And he told everybody, and he wouldn't keep talking. They told us that afterwards when we got to the village. He wouldn't stop talking. And so they invited us. But as Emmanuel said in the car as we're driving, why do we think that they will do all of this work so we can build a Christian school in their village? We drove all the way up the mountain. At the top of the mountain, there are 5 villages up there. It's a very remote area. What we talked about in the car was, I opened to Romans chapter 15. And that's where I'd like to ask you to open first. Romans chapter 15. Verse 20. This is the Apostle Paul writing, and he says this: it has always been my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ was not known, so that I would not be building on someone else's foundation. Rather, as it is written, those who were not told about him will see, and those who have not heard will understand. What I explained to Emanuele is what I want to explain to you. You see, when Rod said about how Susan and I were working in Congo with my grandparents, before we were working with him, I was a kid here in America, studying in high school, preparing everything so that I could go away to college. And between my junior and senior year, somebody put me on an airplane to go out and meet my grandparents who I had never met before. And I spent 45 days traveling around with my grandfather, going from village to village. And he told me the stories of going into a place where the name of Jesus had never been heard before. And by the time I showed up all those years later, there were 306 churches. And when he died, there were 627. And after those years, after I made that short trip out there to meet him, and then when I went back and I worked with him afterwards, there was the time when I went to go see my grandfather, and I said, I think maybe God is calling me to be a missionary. And his advice to me was to go and read through the New Testament and to try and learn what I could learn about what the Apostle Paul taught about himself. Not all of the other things that he taught that are good for the church and that are good for us as believers, but what I could learn about him as a missionary. Because he was the one that God called to go everywhere. And that was his advice to me. This was what I shared with Emanuele in the car as we were going. He said, one of the places that I looked at was in Romans chapter 15, where Paul says, it has always been my ambition. And I said, Emanuele, that was what I held on to. I wanted it to be my ambition to preach Christ where Christ had not been preached before. And so, we got to go to the village of Shambangere. Because as far as we know, there aren't any Christians there. And Christ hasn't been preached. And maybe they won't build a school. Maybe they'll decide it's way too much work. Or maybe they'll find us to be just too unusual of people and they won't want to do it. But we still need to go. I shared with Emanuele and Godfrey in the car when we were driving about the fact that when I come back here to the United States, this is one of the few times that we've come back that I'm not going to teach the Perspectives course. I don't know how many of you have ever heard about the Perspectives course, but it's offered all over the United States. It's the Perspectives on the World Christian Movement. And it's about what God is doing on this planet. What God is doing to reconcile his whole creation to himself. And when I come back here to America, of those 15 lessons, I try and go someplace and I teach one of them. Lesson 13 is my favorite. It's on the spontaneous multiplication of churches. It's how do you go someplace and rather than planting one church, you get a church planting movement started. I love teaching the lesson because it's how I understood what my grandparents did. They went to an area and the gospel took off. And it went everywhere. I love teaching about that. I teach lesson 12 that's about Christian community development. How we as Christians, we do it differently when we go to take schools to people, or when we put wells in villages, or when we do something to go and help people at the bottom. We do it differently as Christian community development than what the secular world does. We have a different way that we do it. And I told him I teach lesson 5. Lesson 5 is on the unleashing of the church. It's a quick study of the book of Acts and what God did to unleash a huge movement. But preaching the gospel where the gospel is not known. What we learn in that course and what we share is that God has been doing it in 2 wonderful ways these past 2,000 years. Some people have been called to go to these places. And in some places, God has brought those people to where Christians are. And that's how the gospel is preached, how Christ is made known to those who do not know. We are so fortunate that we get to go to a village where Christ is not known. But do you know the beautiful thing about village schools, my friends? You know, you said there's 19,000 kids in those schools? Well, over 2,000 of them, they come from villages far away. Their parents didn't build schools, but where they are, there are no schools. And they have left their villages and they have come to our schools in search of an education. God has brought them to us. In some places, we need to go far away to go find them, and in some places, God has brought them right to us. The people that Susan and I live with, they're the Hey Hey people. There are many Christians among them. The Hey Hey people have invited us in to build a school for their kids. But one of the things that we tell them is after you do all of this work and you do everything to make the bricks and haul the stones and do all of that and get the building built, and then we're going to bring the teachers in and they're going to love your students and they're going to work with them and they're going to do everything with them, but also you have to be willing to take everyone else who comes. And these kids come from 10 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles. They come all the way from Dar es Salaam to come to our little village because they want an education so badly, they'll leave their families. What a great opportunity we have. The ambition, Paul said, it has always been my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ was not known. That touched me when I was a young kid. It continues to touch me. What I want for my students in Africa is that they also are touched by it. There might be some of them, like Godfrey and Emanuele and me, who are given the great privilege of getting an open door to go there. That's wonderful. But I want all the rest of them to feel it's also a great privilege when God brings those who have never heard, and He brings them right to them. They might be different. They might not speak Kihehe. They might not have the culture of the Hey Hey people. But they come in search of an education. what we tell all the pastors in those little villages where they invite us. Listen. 2 things. When they decide in the village everyone should make 100 bricks, tell everybody in your church we're going to make 200. When they say everybody's supposed to carry 50 stones, in the church we're going to carry 100 stones. But also, when those kids come from far away, they have to sleep someplace. They got to live someplace. Let's make sure we're the people who take them in. Let's make sure we're the ones who open our homes to those kids. Let us be the ones who show them kindness and love. And when they are feeling they want an education so badly and they feel lonely, let us be the ones who show them friendship. Why do I share this passage with you this morning? Because I want you to be just like I want my students to be in Africa. It's very possible God might, He just might call some of these young kids here to one day go off to places like Africa or other places and to take the gospel to people who haven't heard. That's very possible. God calls some people to get to have that privilege. But God might also just bring people right here, real close to you. And maybe they won't speak your language very well. And maybe they don't have your customs. And maybe they're not like you. But they don't know Christ. They haven't heard. And this is your great and wonderful chance. The door was opened up to me and to Godfrey and Emanuele to go to that village, and we could have decided not to go. And I even questioned strongly whether it was worth all the time and the gas. But the truth is we are April now, and my phone is full of the pictures of all the bricks that those people are making. They've decided to build their school. And they have this incredible goal that by September, their school will be built. And as we told them when we had the meeting, they were so kind to us. We had the meeting first with the leaders. They received us. We talked everything out. They gave us a place to sleep. They fed us. The next day, when we talked with everyone about it, he said, can you make all the bricks? Yes. Can you haul all the stones? Yes. The sand, the water? Yes. And what about teachers? How many teachers have you got? And it was just like in every other village. They were all defeated. They had no teachers. Of course they couldn't have any teachers. Nobody had been beyond the 7th grade. How could they have any teachers? And so I did the theater that I do in every other village. I'm like, oh, that was a dumb question. I shouldn't have asked you. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have asked. Of course you don't have any teachers. We'll find teachers. Are you ready to receive them? Yes. And so the truth is we will probably have, out of the 800 teachers who work with us now, who have chosen to not take good jobs in the cities, who have chosen to go to these villages, we'll probably need between 8 and 10 of them to be willing to be the new teachers who go to this village in September. This will be their great opportunity. God will give them the chance to be the ones who get to go to a village where Christ is not known. And yes, they'll get to teach English, and they'll get to teach physics, and they'll get to teach chemistry, but they'll get to love their students, and they will get to share the gospel with them. What a great and wonderful privilege. But there are so many others who God will not call to go. But God will give them the opportunity to receive those who come from far away. It is very possible to be in a village when these kids come from far away, and it's very possible to ignore them. It's very possible to go about life without ever thinking about them. That's what we purposefully ask our students and our teachers not to do. Make it your ambition to share Christ where Christ is not known. That's my plea to you, the same plea I give to my students and my teachers. Paul said, "It has always been my ambition to preach Christ, to proclaim the gospel where Christ is not known." Before I went to Africa and met my grandparents, I could not say that it had always been my ambition to do that. It was a conscious decision to say that I want that. It's my ambition. Lord, give me that opportunity. That's what I ask my teachers, my students, our friends there in Tanzania. Make it your ambition. Plead with God. Ask Him to give you that opportunity. That's what I would invite you to do also. There's a second passage that I want us to look at. That second passage is what Rod read in Galatians. Galatians is a the second chapter is a phenomenal, interesting chapter. Galatians chapter 2 tells us an incredible story. It comes from the 15th chapter of Acts. Paul is commenting on what happened in the 15th chapter of Acts. He tells us, starting in verse 1, 14 years later I went up again to Jerusalem, this time with Barnabas. I took Titus along also. I went in response to a revelation and set before them the gospel that I preach among the Gentiles. You see, sometimes we forget that Jesus was born in a little Jewish village, and that all of the disciples were Jewish, and they all observed the law, and they were all circumcised, and they all followed all the Jewish traditions. And they preached to the Jewish nation. But Paul, when he was called, he was told he would do something different. He would take the gospel to the Gentiles. An amazing calling. What happened afterwards? Flip back just a page with me, a couple pages to Acts. Look in Acts chapter 15. Look at what we are told. In Acts chapter 15, you see, there was a sharp dispute. There was discussion. There were problems. In verse 5, it says in Acts chapter 15, then some of the believers, and they were believers in Christ, some of the believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees stood up and said, the Gentiles must be circumcised and required to obey the law of Moses. That is what they were told. And they said verbally what all of the other Christians were feeling. Those who come to faith in Christ, they must be circumcised and they must follow the law of Moses. This is why the Perspectives course calls the study of Acts the unleashing of the church. Because you see, if Acts chapter 15 had not happened, if what Paul writes in Galatians had not happened, what would be the case today? The teaching that the followers of Jesus had was that everyone needed to do what before they could be good Christian people, followers of Jesus? First, they had to decide to do what? They had to get circumcised and they had to follow the law of Moses. And Paul said, I told them no. Go back to Galatians again. What does he say in verse 3? Yet not even Titus, who was with me, was compelled to be circumcised, even though he was a Greek. They didn't require it. In verse 5, he says, we did not give in to them for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might remain with you. For those who were in the equipping hour this morning, you didn't notice anything in all of the things that we talked about following the law of Moses and getting circumcised. And that's because of what happened in Acts chapter 15. And that's because Paul stood up and said no. And everyone agreed with him. What we ourselves cannot follow, why should we require the Gentiles to do it? All of the unreached peoples. Why do I have us read this? Why is this important? You see, the big, if we can say, the foundational shift that took place when we, who come from all the nations, when we were no longer required, when the gospel was made clear, we are saved by faith in Christ. There is no following of the law. There is no circumcision. It's not required. At the conclusion of all of this, what does Paul say in verse 10? He says, all they asked was that we should continue to remember the poor. The very thing I was eager to do. That was the part that when my grandfather told me to study what Paul taught me about being a missionary, that was the part that stuck out to me. You see, all of the rest of it was teaching for all of us. It was teaching for us as the church what we need to know. But that was where he told me something about himself. What did he say? They told him, it's great. Preach salvation in Christ alone. It's wonderful. You don't have to follow the law of Moses. The only thing they said I had to do was what? Just remember the poor. And his response was, great. That was the very thing I was eager to do. It wasn't just that Paul helped the poor. It wasn't just that Paul lived with the poor. It was in his heart. He was eager. He was eager to do it. That was what my grandfather talked with me about. The eagerness. Why do I share that with you this morning? Because, again, what has just happened brings it back to the forefront for me. You see, our son Jonathan, after working his job in Japan, he wrote to us and said, really feel that God's calling me to be a missionary and I need to leave here. And he's come back to Tanzania and he's serving as a missionary now. And the kid was just down in Dar es Salaam. And he went one evening to eat on the street. And he wrote me to say that there was this man who was selling spices. And he said, just like all the people were always selling spices on the street corners, everywhere. But it was after dinner, and he was selling spices. And so I bought some spices for Mom, but then I asked him to sit down with me, and I asked him, why are you out selling spices at this time of night? And he said he told me that he wasn't good at selling spices yet, and he hadn't sold enough. He hadn't sold enough so that he had enough money to take home for the family to eat that night. And he said, I'm not good yet at selling spices like everybody else because I don't sell spices. I'm a fisherman. But my boat got wrecked. And so I'm selling spices for my family, and then I'm saving up the money so I can get my boat repaired. And Jonathan, being Jonathan, he wanted to know all the details, and he said, I've counted out how many more boards I need to get and everything like this, and the people who will help me do it. Jonathan asked him how much it would cost to finish it all. It's 80,000 shillings, which sounds like a lot of money to us here in America, but 80,000 shillings is like around $30. $30 is very little to us. It's a mountain. It's a mountain to a poor man trying to feed his family. And that was when Jonathan, he wrote to me, he said, Dad, you remember what happened at Christmas? And you see, what happened at Christmas this last year was different than the Christmases for the last 20 years. And what happened differently this year was that Susan and I were stuck here in America. My mom was thrilled because we did Christmas here at home the first time. I didn't realize she was counting. It was the first time in 21 years. But in Tanzania, we have a tradition. And so since we had to do Christmas here in America, I had had a stroke in October, and you see how it didn't, I'm all good. The doctors did wonderful things for me. But we wanted to imitate what we do in Tanzania, and so everybody got an envelope, and in the envelope there was money. And the money is what we are supposed to do after Christmas, when Christmas is all done. The money, each person is supposed to look about how we will do good unto the poor. And Jonathan wrote and said, Dad, now I found the way. And so he said, I gave him the 80,000 shillings. And he said he went down the street going, that God had answered in ways he never thought possible. When we go in our village and we go see Godfrey, you know, Godfrey has his 4 children. But Godfrey actually has 17 kids who live there with him. One of those kids is Vanessa. Why is Vanessa part of their family today? Because years ago at Christmas, that was our tradition. That yes, we sing Christmas carols. Yes, we have the big feast. Yes, we give gifts to each other. Yes, we go and celebrate that Jesus was born. But on Christmas morning, there are 2 piles of food for each family. One pile of food is the gift that says, may there be no hunger in your house this year. But the other pile of food, the beans, the rice, the sugar, the salt, that's so the parents can talk with their kids and they can go and find the really poor people in the village, and they can go and show love and concern for them. And Godfrey and Vero, one year, they took their kids and chose to go to the household of Vanessa that was before her mom died. And Godfrey and Vero's daughter, Gracie, she went with them, and that was when she first met Vanessa. And after they returned home, Gracie asked her mom, she said, Mom, I want to buy shoes for Vanessa. And that was how Vanessa became Gracie's friend. And when Vanessa's mom died, that was how Vanessa then became Godfrey and Vero's daughter. They took her in because she had no other relatives and no place to go. Village Schools is all about starting schools. It's all about sharing the gospel. But everything we are always telling everyone comes from Galatians chapter 2, verse 10. The eagerness to help the poor, the desire, the wanting to teach our kids, the always everything about what we need to do as Christian people to show love to those who are at the very bottom. This wasn't about getting a committee together and to figure out about what to do about the little girl who lost her mom. This was about the teaching just so permeating everybody that says, you know what? We believe all the doctrines of the church. We believe Galatians chapter 2, 1 through 9. We believe it. We know all the words. We are so thankful for it all. But we want our hearts to be like the hearts of the Apostle Paul, who says, I know all of this. I even fought for it all. I stood up to them. I stood for the gospel by faith alone. But the eagerness was still within me that I would help the poor. My friends, if you go to our website and you learn about village schools, and if you're here and you know what we do, yes, we partner with communities. They work so hard. They make those bricks. We build those buildings. We get them up. We pray that God will send teachers. We send teachers into those villages. And yes, those teachers do go everywhere. They go and find students. They don't just wait for the kids to come. They go village to village. They find all the kids who aren't in school. They bring them all in. They teach them every day. The schools are meant to be self-supporting. The parents are paying so that we can pay those teachers. We're not using any donated funds to do it. We're doing all that. That is everything that you will find on the website. That is everything about village schools. But I am so thankful that when my son Josh came out to visit us, after he went back here to America, and he came out to visit us, and we went to a village far in the west of the country. He went to the village of Intumbe. He went to go and see and talk with Frank, who is our principal at the school there. And Frank introduced him to his students, and he brought the one kid there who he was so proud of to tell Josh. And here is Jeremiah. He's first in his class. He's doing so well here at school. And Jeremiah was all smiles, and he talked with Josh. And afterwards, Josh asked, Frank, where is Jeremiah from? And Frank said, he's from a village about 40 kilometers here. I went to his village, and I got all kinds of other kids to come. And there was Jeremiah. And he said, you know, there are poor people, and then there are really poor people. And Jeremiah comes from a really, really poor family. And so Frank said, I told his parents that he should just come, that God would provide. And Josh said that was kind of bold. You see, Josh didn't know Frank's story. And so Frank told Josh his story about how he was a kid in the village of Mutambula. And it was one of our teachers, when there was absolutely no way for Frank to go to school, that even that little bit that has to be paid, that there was no way that it was ever going to be paid. And Gift told Frank, just come. God will provide. And so the truth is yes, God will provide, because it's Frank who provides for Jeremiah. Frank, who could have the great job in the city making 2 or 3 times what he is getting paid there in that village of Intumbe to work in one of our schools, And out of what Frank, and I tell you, my friends, if I told you what Frank's salary is, you would blush. But out of the little that Frank has, what does Frank do? Frank brings in Jeremiah. And not for one weekend to take care of him. It's 4 years. And Jeremiah is now ready to graduate. That eagerness that Paul has, that's the eagerness that I want my students to have. That's the eagerness that we want our teachers to have. That eagerness to say, I will find those who are poor and I will share with them. The same that I ask for my students is the same I ask for you. It takes work to find the poor. And I'm serious about that. The poor are very human. And that means they don't walk around with signs that say, I am poor and needy. They are quiet. They go through life in silence. They ask God for help. They ask God for help because they don't know how to ask people for help. Because people don't reach out. And so they plead with God. And it's God who then works in our hearts, us as Christian people. And we do what he wants done to help those people. The truth is that all of the theology in the book of Romans is good for us. It's excellent. We can study Romans for months and months and months. The doctrinal teaching in Galatians is incredibly important. We need to believe it. But these two passages they tell us what was in the heart of Paul. The ambition to preach Christ where Christ is not known. The eagerness to help the poor. You know, there are many non-Christian people now who are spending a lot of time trying to study village schools. 19,000 kids, 91 schools. I mean, honestly, what God has done through Godfrey and Emanuele and all these people in villages, it is amazing. I'm in awe of it. I don't even know how to explain it. But the reason when everybody looks at it that they walk away and say, it can't be replicated, it can't be done, is because these Christian teachings are just too hard. And they can't be imitated by people on the outside. The fact is that we are in the process right now of building another 17 schools. Why? Because there are people who have gone to those villages because they are convinced in their hearts that we have to go. That even when we have doubts, we have to go. And the fact is that even when it costs us, we have to show love to those who are at the bottom and incredibly poor. I've been with you folks here for just a short time. But in the short time that I've been, I can see that you are earnest, good Christian people. You follow and you believe the scriptures. I will be honest, it's the first Sunday school class that I've sat in where all of the people, you were talking only a little bit. You were leading. But they know their Bibles and they know their stuff. You are good people. And God has blessed you now with a beautiful building. Right here in this community. And from the little I know of the story, it's hard for anybody here to claim credit for having produced this place. So if you look at it, you can look at it the same way that we do with everything we see in Tanzania and with everything we say. It has to be God at work. It has to be. Because it's not possible to say that it was us. Well, the same thing for you. God has put you here. I pray that the teaching in Romans would cause you to want to reach those who do not know Christ. You folks here do. And there is great hope that your children also will, because they are hearing. But there are so many people out there who are not. They are not. And they won't. Unless you decide to make it your ambition. And I just drove here, so I didn't see much. But I saw enough. This is not the wealthiest community in America. And there are needy people here. And they will do just like needy people in Africa. They will remain quiet. They'll pray to God and they'll remain quiet. And my prayer is you'll look at Galatians and your hearts will be like the hearts of the Apostle Paul. Love the teachings of the church. Be grounded in it. Believe it. Teach it. But hold on to verse 10. In all of it, let our eagerness still be to be helpful to the poor.